The summer of 1994 in Chicago was supposed to be just like any other for the families of the old Lincoln Square neighborhood. Three little girls, Lily, Sarah, and Julie, played carefree in the tree-lined streets, full of energy and laughter. But in the span of just 3 consecutive days that July, they mysteriously vanished without leaving a single trace. For 14 long years, their families lived with no answers, until in 2008. Police uncovered a macabre collection hidden in the attic of a 67-year-old neighbor. The discovery forever changed the community's understanding of this tragedy. How could a man everyone had trusted as the kindly grandfather of the block have secretly kept the personal belongings of 3 children for so many years, treasured like trophies? That revelation would unravel a truth so disturbing it would shake everything the neighborhood thought it knew about the man who had joined the search parties, consoled grieving parents, and seemed the very image of compassion. But before that discovery, here's how it all began. Back in the summer of 1994, Lincoln Square still felt like a village within the city. Its cobblestone alleys, brick walk-ups, and corner stores gave it a charm that seemed frozen in time. That summer was forecast to be especially hot, and as usual, the kids of the block spent their school vacation exploring every corner of their neighborhood. Lily Monroe, just 7, was the youngest of the inseparable trio. She was the only child of Mary Monroe, a textile worker at one of the last old factories in the area. Lily was curious, with wide brown eyes and chestnut hair always tied back. Her mother, widowed 3 years earlier after a workplace accident claimed her husband's life, was raising her alone in their small apartment above Lawrence Avenue. Mary's shift ran from 6 in the morning until mid-afternoon, so Lily spent most days under the watchful eye of neighbors in the close-knit community. Sarah Blake, 8, lived a few blocks away with her parents, John and Sylvia, who owned a small grocery store popular with locals. Sarah was lively and talkative, with curly blonde hair and a contagious smile. She often helped out at the store, stacking canned goods or greeting customers she knew by name. The family lived in a cozy apartment above the shop, with a view of the rooftops stretching across the neighborhood. Julie Parker, 9, was the oldest of the trio and naturally took on the role of leader. She lived with her father, Frank Parker, a mechanic who ran a small garage nearby. Frank had lost his wife the year before to a sudden illness, and though he was clumsy at times, he raised his daughter with genuine tenderness. Julie, tall for her age and strong-willed, resembled her late mother with her jet-black hair and piercing green eyes. Around her neck, she always wore the gold chain her mother had given her on her 8th birthday, just months before she passed away. Lincoln Square in those years was a tight community where everyone knew each other. Shopkeepers called children by name, neighbors leaned from their windows to chat as laundry dried on fire escapes, and men gathered in the evenings at corner taverns to talk politics over cold beer. Parents trusted the unspoken rule that the whole block looked out for its children. One of the most respected figures in the neighborhood was Andrew Chambers, 53 at the time. A city gardener by trade, he had tended Chicago's public green spaces for over 20 years. Widowed and childless, he lived alone in a 19th-century row house just a few hundred yards from where the 3 girls lived. His little front garden full of flowers he cared for with meticulous pride was admired by everyone passing by. Chambers was quiet but always helpful. He often offered neighbors assistance with yard work or small repairs, usually refusing payment. Kids adored him because he always had candy in his pockets and shared fascinating stories about plants and animals. With his neatly trimmed gray beard and kind blue eyes, he looked every bit the grandfatherly figure. He strolled the neighborhood daily, greeting everyone with courtesy, pausing to pet a cat or help an elderly woman carry her groceries. That July had begun idyllically. The 3 girls spent their days exploring, playing hide-and-seek in the alleys, inventing adventure stories on stairways, or simply sitting on the church steps gossiping. Each morning around 9 a.m., they met at the small fountain in Lincoln Square's Central Plaza to decide what to do that day. The heat that summer was intense, with temperatures climbing above 90 degrees. Residents threw open their windows to let in a breeze, while kids pressed on with their games, seemingly unaffected by the sweltering sun. On Tuesday morning, July 12th, Lily left home after kissing her mother goodbye. She wore a blue and white floral dress her grandmother had sewn, brown leather sandals, and carried her favorite rag doll, Celeste, a gift from her mother the year before. Mrs. Garrett, a 70-year-old retiree living on the first floor of Lily's building, later testified that she saw the girls skip down the steps humming a tune. According to her, Lily seemed especially cheerful and confided she was going to see something beautiful with her friends. When asked what it was, Lily only smiled and whispered, "It's a surprise. I'll be back for lunch with Celeste." Around 9:15, Sarah and Julie joined Lily at the Plaza fountain. Several witnesses recalled seeing them together, chatting excitedly. Mr. Reynolds, who ran a newspaper stand there, remembered Julie buying a small bag of licorice candy. He noticed the girls seemed thrilled by some secret plan. Speaking in hushed tones about collections and treasures, he paid it no mind. Used to children's games. At 9:35 sharp, Mrs. Bowers, a schoolteacher on summer break, saw the three girls heading uphill toward a residential street lined with older homes. She noticed Lily still clutching her doll as the girls walked together, laughing without a hint of concern. It was the last reliable sighting of them. By noon, Mary Monroe returned home early for lunch and was alarmed not to find Lily there. Her daughter was always punctual and had never missed a meal without notice. She phoned the Blakes, thinking Lily might be with Sarah. Sylvia Blake answered. Her daughter hadn't come home either. She went upstairs to check Sarah's room, which was empty, the bed still perfectly made. When Frank Parker was called at the garage, he confirmed Julie hadn't returned either. He explained he had given her a few dollars that morning to buy a sandwich if she got hungry, but expected her home by lunchtime so they could visit her grandmother together that afternoon. By 1 o'clock, all three families gathered in the plaza to begin searching. Shopkeepers shut their businesses temporarily to help. Within an hour, more than 50 neighbors scoured the streets, alleys, basements, and yards. Andrew Chambers was among the first to volunteer. Knowing the area well, he suggested checking hidden spots where children might hide or play, unfinished basements, attics, private gardens, construction sites. He even organized a group of 6 men to systematically search from the plaza to the nearby Riverside Park where the girls sometimes wandered. By 3 o'clock, the families contacted the police. The local precinct sent a team immediately, led by Senior Detective Mark Duran, a veteran with 25 years on the force. He interviewed each family separately, recording every detail of the girls' last sightings. The first inquiries revealed they hadn't boarded any public buses or trains. Drivers and transit staff reported no memory of 3 young girls traveling together that morning. Hospitals confirmed no unidentified children matching their description had been admitted. By late afternoon, more than 200 people joined the search. K-9 units from the state police arrived with trained dogs, starting at the plaza where the girls were last seen and sweeping through surrounding blocks. The dogs caught interest in several spots, but none led to a breakthrough. Andrew Chambers accompanied one of the K-9 units, pointing out to the state troopers the topographical details of the neighborhood and the spots where kids might realistically hide. He seemed deeply shaken by the disappearance, repeating over and over that he couldn't believe something like this could happen in such a safe, close-knit community. His knowledge of the area and his devotion impressed the investigators, who noted his cooperation in their official reports. Night fell with no sign of the 3 girls. The organized search was suspended around 11 p.m., but many residents carried on with flashlights, combing through alleys, basements, and abandoned buildings until exhaustion took over. Mary Monroe, John and Sylvia Blake, and Frank Parker spent a sleepless night waiting for the sound of a knock at their doors that never came. By sunrise on Wednesday, July 13th, the search resumed with reinforced resources. The case had been handed over to Chicago's Major Crimes Division, and Detective Commissioner Lawrence Gerard, an experienced investigator specializing in missing children, was assigned to lead. A temporary command center was set up inside the local elementary school, which was closed for summer break. Flyers with the girls' photographs were plastered across the city and distributed in train stations, malls, and public areas. Local media picked up the story. GN News aired the first televised report, interviewing the families and appealing for witnesses. The grief in their voices was palpable, especially Mary Monroe, who begged anyone with information to come forward. Investigators widened the search perimeter from Lincoln Square to the entire north side, then across Chicago and its suburbs. Roadblocks were set up on major highways, and all suspicious vehicles were checked. A special tip line was created to handle the growing flood of calls from the public. Andrew Chambers continued to be a visible presence throughout. He had taken leave from his city job to devote himself fully to the search. Every day he walked with volunteer teams, suggesting new areas to comb through, offering comfort to the families, and projecting calm. He even opened his home to out-of-town relatives who came to join the search, refusing any money in return. As the weeks passed, Lincoln Square changed. The cheerful neighborhood where everyone had once known each other became paralyzed by a collective anxiety. Daily life was reshaped by fear and suspicion. Mary Monroe was the first to collapse under the weight of despair. A dedicated worker who had never missed a day at the textile plant since her husband's death, she suddenly found herself unable to return. Her boss and co-workers showed rare compassion, granting her open-ended leave. But the absence of work only deepened her guilt and obsession. Every morning at 7, she left her apartment with a photo of Lily and a stack of flyers in her purse. She walked block after block, gradually widening her radius, handing photos to strangers. Downtown shopkeepers grew accustomed to her passing. Some greeted her with compassion, others averted their eyes, unable to face such raw grief. John and Sylvia Blake reacted in opposite ways. John, naturally upbeat and energetic, threw himself into constant activity. He turned his small grocery into an unofficial headquarters, covering the windows with updates, tips from the police, and schedules of volunteer searches. He extended his hours, even opening Sundays, explaining that keeping the store alive was the best way to bring Sarah home. Sylvia, once warm and talkative with customers, withdrew into silence. She spoke only to announce prices or make change, flinching at every ring of the bell over the door, each time hoping it was her daughter, each time crushed when it was only another customer. John eventually had to hire his sister-in-law to help at the store because Sylvia could no longer face conversations with neighbors. Frank Parker approached things with cold pragmatism. A meticulous mechanic, used to diagnosing complex problems, he applied the same logic to his search. He built a private investigation board in his apartment. Maps pinned with notes, lists of names, timelines reconstructed. It gave him the illusion of control, but it also revealed his refusal to accept the possibility that Julie might never return. He continued cooking meals for two, setting her place at the table each night just in case she came home hungry. The community mobilized with remarkable solidarity. A retired teacher, Mrs. Leclerc, formed a support association for the families. They organized fundraisers to print posters, rent meeting halls, and cover travel for relatives chasing leads. Weekly search parties continued, drawing 50 volunteers even 6 months after the disappearance. Andrew Chambers became the central figure of this mobilization. His knowledge of the neighborhood, his availability, and his connection with the families made him the natural point of contact for anyone wanting to help. He even offered his own backyard as a gathering space, setting up tables and chairs for organizational meetings. His home on West Sunnyside Avenue became a symbolic rallying point for the neighborhood's solidarity. The major crimes detectives also valued Chambers' cooperation. Commissioner Gerard noted in his reports that Chambers was a crucial resource for understanding the social fabric of the neighborhood and earning the trust of witnesses. Chambers had a rare ability to make people comfortable, often drawing out details they hadn't shared with police. More than anything, he provided moral support. He listened without judgment, comforted without false promises, and kept people determined without feeding dangerous illusions. Mary Monroe would later say he was like a father. To her in those days, the one she turned to when the uncertainty became unbearable. Frank Parker valued his long walks with Chambers during search, sweeps through the outer neighborhoods. The gardener had the quiet wisdom of a man who had spent his life observing nature and seasons. And he always found words to remind Frank that children were more resilient than people thought, and that hope should never be abandoned without certainty. The Blakes, too, were touched by his generosity. When their store began losing customers who avoided the now tragic neighborhood, Chambers discreetly offered them financial help, saying he had some savings and would be glad to assist. John refused politely but was deeply moved by the gesture. Despite the massive resources devoted to the investigation, it stagnated. Over 300 tips were logged, leading to just as many dead ends. Several leads had seemed promising. A suspicious man spotted near the school, An unfamiliar vehicle parked on a side street the morning of July 12th. Screams heard in an abandoned building nearby. But every thread unraveled under scrutiny. Police thoroughly vetted every resident, checking for prior criminal records or odd behavior. The scrutiny bred unease. Neighbors eyed one another differently, wondering if someone they'd known for years had secrets. Many men from the neighborhood were summoned for routine questioning. Though handled with tact, the interviews left scars in local trust. Andrew Chambers was, of course, questioned as well. Detective Mark Duran conducted a detailed interrogation in September 1994, given Chambers' closeness to the families and his deep knowledge of the neighborhood. Chambers answered with patience, offering a precise account of his morning on July 12th, waking at 6:30, breakfast while listening to the news, watering his garden until 8:15, then leaving for work with the city's Parks Department, arriving at 8:45 sharp. Co-workers confirmed both his presence and his normal behavior. He had even attended a staff meeting from 9 to 10:30 about a new landscaping project. Duran wrote in his report that Chambers had shown exemplary cooperation and genuine concern for the children's fate. His alibi for that morning was solid. The winter that followed was brutal for the families. The holiday season, always centered around children, cut especially deep. Mary Monroe refused to celebrate. She stayed alone in her apartment, declining invitations, but still placed a small Christmas tree in Lily's room with wrapped gifts, just in case. The Blakes tried to keep up appearances, decorating their store as usual, but the lights seemed hollow without Sarah. Customers noticed Sylvia wiping away tears behind the counter as she rang up holiday orders. Frank Parker finally took his mother-in-law to Florida, hoping the change of scenery might ease the pain. But even under the Miami sun, he scanned the faces of children on the boardwalk, always carrying Julie's photo in his pocket, showing it to waiters and ice cream vendors. Through all of it, Andrew Chambers displayed remarkable delicacy during what should have been a festive season. On the evening of December 24th, Andrew Chambers stopped by each family's home with modest, carefully chosen gifts. He brought Mary a bouquet from his greenhouse, a basket of winter produce for the Blakes, and a bottle of good wine for Frank, something he'd kept in his basement for years. He never stayed long. He knew his presence, however welcome, could never fill the silence left behind by the girls. 14 years passed in that same rhythm of searching and dwindling hope. The case of the 3 girls from Lincoln Square became one of those cold cases Chicago detectives still cited during trainings on missing children. The resources dedicated to it, however, had thinned. Commissioner Lawrence Gerard retired in 2003, leaving the file to his successor, Captain Lauren Gerard, his nephew, who had grown up hearing about the case at family gatherings. By March 2008, Andrew Chambers was 67, retired since 2006 after a spotless career with the city's Parks Department. He still lived in his old row house on West Sunnyside, tending his garden with the same fastidious passion. Neighbors respected him as a steady, wise presence in a world that seemed to change overnight. He moved through the years quietly, helping where he could, attending the annual vigils for the 3 girls, keeping a gentle, steady connection with the families who remained. Mary Monroe had managed, in part, to rebuild her life. After years of therapy and unwavering support from the community, she returned to part-time work in 1998, then full-time in 2001. She eventually met Charles, a widower her own age. They built a life together, one that honored Lily's memory while slowly accepting that her daughter might never come home. In 2005, Mary moved to Lakeview, explaining that she could no longer bear walking past the corners that reopened every wound. The Blakes sold their grocery in 1999 and moved to the northern suburbs, settling in Skokie. John found work as a manager at a produce distribution co-op, while Sylvia, with the help of steady counseling, began climbing out of her depression. They had a son, Thomas, in 2002, a new reason to wake up each morning, though his laughter sometimes sharpened the ache of Sarah's absence. They still visited Lincoln Square often to see Andrew, whom they considered part of their chosen family. Frank Parker's path was the hardest. Unable to live with Julie's disappearance, he slid into alcoholism in 1997 and lost his job at the garage. Several rehab attempts failed. He lived alone in a small studio on the west side, surviving on disability and public assistance. Still, he searched every day, riding buses through the city and suburbs, showing Julie's photo to anyone who would look. Andrew was one of the few who kept steady contact, bringing groceries and making sure Frank had what he needed to get through the week. On March 15, 2008, something that seemed minor at first would shatter the long stalemate. A new neighbor, Ms. Madeline Violet, who had moved in next door to Andrew in February, called the non-emergency line to report repeated nighttime disturbances coming from his house. Recently divorced at 43 and desperate for peace, she told the responding officer she often heard strange sounds from the attic, creaks, the shifting of objects, and sometimes what sounded like muffled crying or low moans. The community policing officer knew of Andrew by reputation, a model citizen. Still, that afternoon he decided to stop by and, if possible, smooth things over. This was meant to be nothing more than a courtesy call, the kind of quiet intervention that keeps neighbors friendly. When the officer rang Andrew's bell around 5:30 p.m., he was greeted with the retiree's usual politeness. Andrew seemed genuinely surprised by the complaint, explaining he lived alone and couldn't imagine what the noises might be. He suggested Ms. Violet might be hearing old heating pipes or perhaps squirrels nesting in the eaves of a century-old house. Hoping to settle the matter without fuss, the officer asked if he might take a quick look in the attic to rule out animals. The request was cordial, the tone easy. For the first time since the officer had met him, Andrew hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face and his confidence slipped. He said the attic was cluttered with old things he hadn't sorted in years, and he was embarrassed by the mess. Understandable, but the officer's instincts prickled. He gently pressed, saying it was just routine and that he wasn't there to judge housekeeping. He even offered to go up alone, to respect Andrew's privacy. Andrew tried once more to delay the visit until morning so he could straighten up. The officer remained kind but firm. Reluctantly, Andrew agreed. The stairwell to the attic was narrow and dark, typical of 19th-century workers' homes. Andrew climbed ahead, slowly, stopping twice under the pretext of catching his breath. The officer felt the tension in the air like a wire pulled tight. At the top, Andrew pulled a chain to a bare bulb, washing the rafters with jaundiced light. Contrary to his excuses, the attic was not cluttered. It was remarkably orderly. Shelves lined the walls, supporting stacks of boxes, each labeled in neat handwriting and arranged by size. A small table sat beneath the skylight with a chair and a desk lamp. Less a storage space than a quiet second room, carefully maintained. The officer's eyes scanned for droppings or disturbed insulation, anything that might explain the noises. Then something caught his attention. A line of shoeboxes on the back shelf, each with a handwritten label. He couldn't quite read them from where he stood, but their precise alignment and presentation didn't feel like ordinary storage. Andrew watched him with rising anxiety, his hands trembling as he tried to carry on a casual conversation about old houses and thin walls. The nerves were too visible now. The officer, trained to read the small tells, stepped closer to the shelves. "You're a meticulous collector," he said lightly, moving toward the labels. "What do you keep in all these boxes?" The question was gentle, conversational. Andrew went pale as the uniform neared his neatly kept secrets. "Oh, just old keepsakes," Andrew said, attempting a careless tone that came out tight. "Family photos, letters, things everyone keeps for no good reason." He shifted, trying to step between the officer and the shelf. In the cramped attic, the move was clumsy and obvious. Now fully alert, the officer noticed several boxes carried dates in careful script: July 1994, summer 1994, keepsakes 1994, the year pressed on the air. It was the summer the three girls disappeared. The officer remembered it well. He also remembered how central Andrew had been to the volunteer searches. "The year those little girls went missing," he murmured, more to himself than to Andrew. The effect was immediate. Andrew froze. The color drained from his face. The silence thickened, broken only by his uneven breathing. "I'd like to take a look inside these," the officer said, his voice returning to professional steadiness. This was no longer a neighborly courtesy. It was the beginning of something else. Andrew opened his mouth to object, but no words came. His knees seemed to weaken, and he steadied himself against the wall. Everything about him now telegraphed a guilt he could no longer hide. Without waiting for permission, the officer reached for the first box labeled July 1994 and lifted the lid. What he saw froze him with horror. Inside the box, laid out in tissue paper, were items that clearly belonged to a child. a neatly folded blue and white floral dress, a pair of worn brown leather sandals in a little kid size, and a rag doll with red yarn hair. Each piece carried a small handwritten tag with a single name, Lily. Hands shaking, the officer opened the second box. Different children's clothes, a red skirt, a white t-shirt, striped socks, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. The tag read Sarah. The third box held more belongings labeled Julie, blue pants, a yellow sweater, and most chilling of all, a fine gold chain that glinted under the attic's jaundiced light. Andrew Chambers collapsed into the chair by the small work table, head in his hands, sobbing quietly. 14 years of facade crumbled in minutes. The kindly neighbor who had comforted families and joined every search now revealed himself as a predator who kept his victims' clothing like trophies. Shaken to his core, the officer immediately called his superiors and then Major Crimes. Within an hour, the block was swarmed by squad cars, crime scene techs, and seasoned detectives. Captain Laurent Girard, who had inherited the case from his uncle, arrived among the first, realizing with bitter clarity that the answer to a 14-year mystery had been sitting a few 100 yards from a police precinct the whole time. The discovery in Chambers' attic triggered the largest criminal operation the city had seen since the original searches in 1994. Close to 7 p.m., Captain Girard took command, his emotion barely hidden. The case had haunted his family for years, and he understood the historical weight of the moment. The perimeter was widened to the entire block. Evidence technicians methodically photographed every object before cataloging it. A representative from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office came in person to oversee early findings. Andrew Chambers was taken into custody and transferred to the Central Station in a state of total collapse. The 67-year-old, who had upheld an image of perfect respectability for 14 years, seemed to age a decade in an instant. He said nothing during the ride, staring at his cuffed hands with a look of absolute defeat. Initial examinations quickly confirmed the identifications. Mary Monroe recognized Lily's doll, Celeste. By a small tear in the left ear, Lily had stitched herself just weeks before she vanished. The gold chain bore the engraving, "For Julie, Mom," the same inscription Frank Parker had ordered from a jeweler downtown for his daughter's 8th birthday. The clothing matched the descriptions the families gave in 1994. But the most disturbing find was a handwritten notebook in the desk drawer. In tidy script, Chambers had recorded weeks of observations on the 3 girls, their routines, routes, favorite games, and family dynamics. The notes showed systematic surveillance and planning, destroying any notion of an impulsive crime. June 12, 1994. Lily plays alone in the courtyard from 2 to 4 p.m. Mother works until 3. Lily loves her red-haired rag doll and takes it everywhere. One entry read. Another. Sarah helps at the family store in the morning, meets friends at the plaza in the afternoon. Often wears the red skirt. And, Julie tends to lead, always wears her gold chain. The girls trust the adults in the neighborhood. The notebooks also revealed his methods for drawing the children in. He won their trust with candy, stories about gardening, and promises to show them hidden treasures in his attic. Over time, the girls treated him like a substitute grandfather, especially potent in a world where Lily and Julie no longer had their fathers, and Sarah's grandparents lived far away. The plan had unfolded over weeks. He first gained each girl's confidence, then pitched the idea of seeing his special collection together. On the morning of July 12th, he waited by the fountain in the plaza, knowing they gathered there daily, and told them he had old, valuable toys in the attic he wanted to give them. Questioning began the next morning at 6 a.m., led by Captain Girard with Detective Daniel Morrow, a specialist in crimes against children. After a sleepless night in a cell, Chambers no longer tried to deny the obvious once confronted with the physical evidence. Instead, he revealed details slowly, rationing them as if savoring one last measure of control. "I've always loved children," he said in his first statement. "They were so innocent, so pure. I only wanted to protect them from a cruel world." The declaration exposed a profoundly disturbed personality. Hours of silence followed. He refused to explain the precise circumstances of the girl's disappearance. Investigators quickly understood they were dealing with a practiced manipulator, one who, even cornered, tried to dictate the tempo. He demanded a psychiatrist. He asked for frequent breaks. He set conditions for continuing his confession. It felt like a cruel game, and the families, waiting at last for the truth, were dragged along with every pause. News of Chambers' arrest leaked fast. By the next morning, Chicago stations broke in with special reports announcing a major development in the Lincoln Square cold case. The reaction across the city was intense. The case had remained one of the most haunting crimes of the 1990s. Mary Monroe learned of the arrest in a phone call from Captain Gerard. She broke down, repeating, "I knew it. I knew we had to keep looking." Her partner, Charles, rushed her to their doctor as the shock hit like a wave. After 14 years of uncertainty, the thought of finally knowing what happened to Lily was as terrifying as it was relieving. The Blakes were reached at their home in Skokie. Sylvia fainted when she heard Andrew's name, the man she had once considered a friend and a lifeline. John, more pragmatic, demanded details and said they would seek standing in the case as soon as possible. Their 6-year-old son, Thomas, didn't understand why his parents were crying over a sister he knew only from photographs. Frank Parker was the hardest to find. Detectives located him in a West Side bar, drowning his daily grief. When they told him, he refused to believe it at first, insisting Andrew was his best friend, the only one who truly understood his pain. They had to show him photos of the seized items. When Frank recognized Julie's gold chain, he let out a raw animal howl that froze every patron in place. Meanwhile, the search of Chambers' house continued. In the basement, investigators found a meticulously organized workshop. Well-maintained tools, coils of new rope never used, unopened plastic sheeting, and an unusual stock of cleaning chemicals, far beyond what a typical household would keep. The backyard was examined inch by inch with human remains detection dogs. It was a brutal spectacle for neighbors who watched their quiet block transform into a crime scene. 14 years after the fact, Miss Violet, the neighbor whose noise complaint set everything in motion, was racked with guilt for having lived next door so long without suspecting anything. No remains were found in the yard, but soil analysis revealed old traces of quicklime, a substance used to accelerate decomposition. The discovery deepened suspicions about the girls' fate without revealing where they were. On March 21st, Chambers finally agreed to give a full account in the presence of his public defender. He reconstructed with chilling precision the events of July 12, 1994. The recording would lay bare the scope of his premeditation and the cold, methodical way he acted. "I waited by the fountain around 9:30, he said in a dull, even voice. "I knew they'd come, like every morning. I told them I had something beautiful to show them in my attic. Old toys my grandmother left me. They were excited, especially Lily, who loved old dolls. He described walking them to his house, offering candy and cold drinks to put them at ease, then leading them up to the attic on the pretext of showing his collection. Once there, everything changed. He locked the door from the inside and laid out his true intentions to the terrified children. At first they thought it was a game," Chambers continued, still clinical. "But when they wanted to leave and I refused, they started to cry. I tried to calm them, to explain they were going to stay with me, that I'd take care of them better than their families." The details he provided were so technically exact they betrayed a long, deliberate psychological preparation. He had prepared the attic for this exact purpose, installing interior deadbolts, stocking supplies, and arranging a living space he believed he could share with the girls for an indefinite time. His delusion was to keep them there until they accepted that they were better off with him. Reality crushed that fantasy fast. The girls did not adjust. They became hysterical. They cried constantly, refused to eat, and tried to escape at every turn. Lily, the youngest, clutched her rag doll, Celeste, and begged for her mother. Sarah pleaded to be let out so she could help her parents at the store. Julie, the most determined, urged her friends to be brave and kept probing for a way out. "After 2 days, I couldn't take the screaming," Chambers said flatly. "The neighbors would hear. Someone would come check. They wouldn't understand that I wanted what was best for them. They preferred families that didn't care for them." Enough. It was the predator's warped logic, years in the making, portraying himself as a misunderstood savior instead of what he was. What followed in Chambers' statement laid out the absolute horror of those July days in 1994. Even with all his experience, Captain Gerard struggled to keep his composure as the old man continued. "On the 3rd day, Julie figured out how to jimmy the attic lock while I was sleeping," he said. "She was smarter than I'd imagined. She'd pried a strip of metal from an old crate and used it like a pick. When I woke around 4 a.m., she was working the latch. Chambers described catching Julie in the act. The 9-year-old didn't cower. She defied him, telling him she would run, tell the police that everyone was looking for them, that her parents would never forgive what he was doing. The challenge ignited a rage he had kept under wraps. I didn't plan for her to hold out, he said in that same clinical monotone. In my mind, she'd come to love me like a grandfather. But she was too strong, too sure. She influenced the other two. I realized she would never change. What came next revealed Chambers' true nature, a predator who could slide from coaxing to lethal violence without warning. He said he neutralized Julie first, an euphemism that fooled no one. The technical details he gave showed premeditation and tools prepared in advance. Lily and Sarah saw everything, he continued. They were terrified. Lily hid behind her doll as if Celeste could protect her. Sarah prayed the prayers her parents taught her. She knew what was coming. The investigators heard about the pleas, the promises to stay silent, the desperate bargaining, nothing that could derail the cold logic already in motion. I couldn't let them go after what happened with Julie, Chambers said, with chilling pragmatism. They would have told. My life would be over. I decided to end it quickly. I told them I was sending them to join Julie so they could be together, Captain. Gerard stopped the interview several times, both to steady himself and to let the clerk keep pace with an admission of almost unspeakable cruelty. In the observation room, the prosecutor and the forensic psychologist watched with a mixture of horror and professional focus. Chambers then explained how he disposed of the bodies. He waited until the night of July 15th, then moved the remains quietly using his municipal parks vehicle. Drawing on his gardener's knowledge and access to natural areas, he chose a remote spot across the state line in the Kettle Moraine State Forest, an old logging trace near a secluded clearing. I used to go there for work to collect seeds and cuttings, he said, just as cold. No one goes that far. Too hard to reach on weekends. He dug deep, used quicklime he had on hand, and finished in about 3 hours. He gave precise directions, turnoffs, landmarks, even the weather. It was very hot, no wind. I was drenched with sweat, but nobody was outside. The heat kept people home. His precision only underscored how methodical it had all been. And then, Gerard asked, fighting the nausea the details provoked. How did you go home and resume your life? I took a long shower, Chambers replied, detached. Washed my clothes, cleaned my tools, disinfected the attic. The next morning, when the family started searching, I was ready to help. It made sense for me to join. Everyone knew I cared about the neighborhood's kids. It was the most terrifying aspect of him, the total compartmentalization. He had committed unspeakable acts, then played the compassionate neighbor for 14 years, comforting the very families he had destroyed. You felt no remorse watching the parents suffer? Gerard pressed. No emotion as you searched, as you consoled Mary Monroe, as you supported Frank Parker? Chambers paused, as if analyzing his own feelings for the first time in years. At first it was hard, he said at last. Seeing Mary cry reminded me of Lily's writing and drawings, but over time I realized they needed me. I was their hope. I was their link to the girls. In a way, I kept their memory alive. The perverse rationalization mapped the depth of his pathology, turning murder into a warped act of love, convincing himself that keeping the girls' belongings and sustaining the family's hope was a service to his victims. The things in your attic, why keep them? Asked Detective Daniel Morrow. They were my memories of them, Chambers said. Lily's dress still smelled like a little girl. Sarah's shoes kept the shape of her feet. Julie's chain felt warm when she wore it. Keeping those things kept a part of them with me. It was how I didn't forget. He had converted the children into objects of morbid veneration, maintaining a fantasy relationship with the girls he killed. The attic functioned as a private shrine. I went up often at night, he admitted. I took their things out. I looked at them. I remembered their voices, their laughter. Sometimes I spoke to them, told them what was happening in the neighborhood, how their families were doing. It was our secret. That, finally, explained the nocturnal noises Ms. Violet had heard, the creaks and low sounds that drove her to complain. Chambers spent nights in the attic, handling the artifacts of his crimes and talking to ghosts. Court-ordered psychiatric evaluations painted a complex, terrifying profile. Chambers showed all the hallmarks of a narcissistic pervert and organized psychopath. His ability to maintain a normal social facade for decades while privately feeding murderous fantasies made him a textbook case. Dr. Catherine Mercer, a forensic psychiatrist, wrote in her report, "Andrew Chambers presents an exceptional degree of psychological dissociation, allowing him to fully partition his criminal persona from his public self. This adaptive camouflage renders him particularly dangerous, capable of deceiving his community for decades without arousing suspicion. The investigation also suggested this might not have been his first crime. Personal notebooks found in his bedroom showed he had observed and cataloged children in the neighborhood for years. Several girls were mentioned, with unsettling detail about their routines, vulnerabilities, and fears. Detectives reopened multiple unresolved missing child files in the region as a result. I never hurt any other child," Chambers protested when confronted with those entries. "Lily, Sarah, and Julie were special. They were perfect. I couldn't do it again after them." His denial convinced no one, especially after investigators found disturbing evidence in his home: candid photos of neighborhood children, hand-drawn school routes, and meticulously logged dismissal times. Chambers' revelations finally gave the families the truth about their daughters, but it was a truth more horrific than anything imagined over 14 years of uncertainty. The grieving that had been frozen in place could at last begin, paired with the renewed agony of knowing how the girls' final hours unfolded. Mary Monroe was the first to ask to see Chambers in jail. With the support of her therapist and her partner Charles, she wanted answers to the questions that had haunted her since 1994. Did Lily suffer? Did she ask for her mother? Did she keep her doll with her to the end? The face-to-face took place on April 15, 2008, inside a visitation room at Cook County Jail in the presence of Captain Gerard and Chambers' public defender. Mary, so changed since 1994, sat across from the man she had once considered a friend in the worst days of her life. Chambers looked almost unchanged, still wearing the grandfatherly mask that had fooled so many. "Why my daughter?" Mary asked, her voice trembling. "What did she ever do to you?" She was 8 years old. "She trusted you." "Lily was perfect," he answered with the same chilling calm he'd shown since his arrest. "Innocent. Pure. I wanted to preserve that, keep her from growing up and becoming like everyone else. In a way, I kept her perfect forever." Mary listened with a mix of horror and pity. The man who spoke of purity had destroyed the purest life she knew. "She liked you," Mary whispered. She talked about the nice Mr. Andrew who gave her candy. How could you betray that trust? For the first time since his confession began, Chambers seemed unsettled. He looked away, his hands trembling on the metal table. "She really did like me," he admitted. "That's what made it so hard. She didn't understand why I wouldn't let her go home. She kept saying her mother would worry, that she had to be home for lunch. To the end, she believed you would come get her." The words shattered Mary and, in a cruel way, brought her a fragile peace. Her daughter died thinking of her, holding to the certainty of a mother's love. That certainty gave shape to 14 years of searching and hope. Frank Parker refused any meeting. "I'd kill him with my own hands," he said when authorities offered the option. His drinking worsened. He wandered the city with Julie's photo in his pocket, talking to it in the open air. Social workers tried to help, but he pushed them away, saying he deserved the pain for failing to protect his child. John and Sylvia Blake took different paths. John demanded every detail, attended each preliminary hearing, and pored over the case file. He needed to understand how such a crime could unfold in their quiet neighborhood, and how they had trusted a predator for so many years. The obsession gave his anger somewhere to go. Sylvia spiraled into a deep depression that required weeks of hospitalization. To learn that the man who comforted her through panic attacks was the one who murdered her daughter overwhelmed any remaining defenses. She developed a generalized paranoia, startled by any touch, trusting no one. Following Chambers' directions, the search teams located the burial site with startling speed. His description was so exact that K-9 units found the clandestine grave in Kettle Moraine State Forest in under 6 hours. The exhumation, conducted with utmost respect, confirmed his confession. DNA identified the remains, along with personal items found with each child. Lily had indeed kept Celeste clutched to her. Sarah still wore the small gold cross her parents gave her for First Communion. Julie had the little bag of licorice she'd bought that morning. The families could finally hold funerals. On May 3rd, 14 years after their disappearance, Lily Monroe, Sarah Blake, and Julie Parker were laid to rest side by side at Rose Hill Cemetery, not far from St. Matthias Church, where they had often played on the steps. Hundreds gathered to honor them and to stand with the families. Andrew Chambers went to trial in September 2009 in the Circuit Court of Cook County, charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder with aggravating factors. Over 15 days, jurors heard the methodical, harrowing details and the portrait of a profoundly disordered mind. Forensic psychiatrists concluded he was fully responsible despite his personality disorders. He showed no sincere remorse. He kept dressing his acts in the language of love, refusing to acknowledge their brutality. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours before returning guilty on all counts. Chambers was sentenced to life, imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the maximum under state law, reflecting both the enormity of the crimes and the need to protect the public from a predator who had moved undetected among them. The trial also laid bare the scale of the investigation. More than 1,000 witnesses interviewed, hundreds of leads chased, thousands of hours of work. The fact that the solution sat a few blocks from a precinct, in the home of a man who had joined the searches, showed how chillingly well some offenders can hide in plain sight. The case prompted changes in practice, more rigorous checks on the immediate circle around victims, and protocols to prevent suspects from embedding themselves in volunteer searches. Lincoln Square took years to recover. Learning that a predator had lived among them for decades reshaped the neighborhood's social fabric. Many residents moved away, unable to live with the building's shadow. Chambers' house was sold by distant heirs, gutted, and renovated by new owners trying to erase the past. But the people who remained never forgot that 3 innocent girls lost their lives there, betrayed by a man everyone had trusted. The story is a stark reminder of how deceptive appearances can be, and how difficult it is to see predators who wear the most respectable masks. For 14 years, Andrew Chambers played the perfect neighbor, searching for his own victims and comforting the families he had destroyed. That terrifying duplicity exposes the complexity of human evil and the need for vigilance, even with those who seem most worthy of trust. And yet Lily, Sarah, and Julie's story also shows that truth, however painful, can bring a measure of peace. After years of uncertainty, their loved ones finally could grieve and honor their memory with dignity.